All right. Let me get myself situated. I learned how to swim when I was in elementary school. And when we moved to the U.S., we had the astonishing good fortune of moving into a home with a backyard pool. And I spent countless hours in that pool perfecting all sorts of tricks and flips. And my friends and I had, escalating challenges for one another. Who can do the most laps without coming up for air? Who can gather the most rings from the pool floor? Who can do the most complicated flips and spins on the diving board? It was endless fun. And when I had kids, I wanted them to learn how to swim for safety reasons. And I wanted them to learn how to swim really well for joy reasons. So I took them to the lake and I taught them to swim. And I always preferred the lake because it's beautiful, it's peaceful, it's quiet, and it's really easy to bring a bunch of floaties. But at some point, I wanted them to learn how to dive, and for that, we had to go to the pool. So I don't know if you guys remember, but when you first learn how to dive, it takes a little coordination to make it work. So you stand at the edge, right, and you curl your toes around the lip of the pool, and you put your arms up like this, and you kind of duck your head, bend your knees, and then hop, you jump. Well, the first 30 times or so, they just jump in, feet first. So you stress all the essentials again, and then the next 30 times or so, they bend at the waist, and then they do a belly flop. Because in the last second, they straighten themselves out, they lock those knees, and then they propel themselves forward, and so they fall flat. So a solid dive really requires flexible, springy knees, and it just doesn't work without that. And then at some point, suddenly it just clicks, and then it's exhilarating. So for me, at some point, I discovered that this idea of having the springy knees, like I can't even talk about it without doing it at the same time. Bending my knees, doing that little bounce. Those springy flexed knees, those are a wonderful metaphor to me for living life. So diving into life, for me, means to live richly and fully and wholeheartedly and courageously and optimistically. So I'm not a huge risk taker. I've never dived off the high dive, and I have no intention of ever doing that. But I'll go nuts off the low dive. And I'm kind of like this in life as well. I'm willing to try lots of fun stuff, but I have some limits. So you won't see me parachute from a plane, or sail around the world in a small craft, or go visit sharks in one of those shark cage things. Not for me. I know that could probably be a ton of fun, but definitely not for me. So diving into life and living joyfully means stepping outside of my comfort zone and trying new things, but within some margins of comfortableness for me. So, but the things that I'm talking about so far, those are all things that I would choose to do, or that I would seek out in my life. Experiences that I might want to have. But keeping my spiritual knees flexed, to me, on a daily basis, has more to do with the many things that happen in life that I don't necessarily choose, that I don't necessarily have any control over. So things like I have meetings scheduled, my day is all planned out, and the nurse calls and says, I have a kid with a fever and I need to come and get her. Or I have tons of projects that I'm juggling and my purse gets stolen and all my cards and IDs are gone and I have to deal with that instead. Or I've scheduled 3 really important things at the same time on the same day. Or a family member is livid because I forgot to take care of something that I promised to do. Or I'm in my PJs with my bed hair up on end, and a loved one knocks at my door for a complete and total surprise visit for 3 days. Or something really hard happens, right? Sometimes hard things happen. A death, a relationship rupture. So I'm sure all of you have had days like this, or things like these, or times like this. And this is life. It just is. And there's no one's life without some of these things in it. So the interesting thing is that when I think of all of these things as catastrophes or problems or challenges, then that's what they are. But when I think of some of these things, at least, when I think of them as new information, then that's what they become. So the situation in front of me then really becomes like a puzzle in which I'm dealt information piecemeal, and I have to integrate that new information into what I'm going to do next. I have to hone my response as I get more information. It's a little bit like playing Texas Hold'em poker. I don't know if you guys know that. And we talk about this stuff in Unity all the time, right? That we can choose how to respond to whatever situation we find ourselves in, whatever circumstances we might be experiencing. And we talk a lot about responding with love, responding in love, responding with compassion or understanding or caring. And for me, when my situation has to do with a particular person, then those things are always in my mind, because that's how I want to be. I want to respond with love and caring and kindness. It's how I want to show up in the world. But if there's not a person I'm dealing with, if it's just the messiness of life, then it's a lot harder for me to handle giving up the illusion of control or the delusion of control. It's been harder for me to embrace just the unpredictability of life, and harder to be gentle about the messes that I make in my life. Messes that I create through inattention, or thoughtlessness, or sloppiness, or procrastination. That last one is my specialty. So I began to think about what responding well to regular life would look like. And I'm a very visual person, so I needed some kind of visual anchor to think about that. What would it look like if I embraced the mercurial nature of the day-to-day? What would it look like if I could face my own screw-ups with humor? What would it look like if I could recognize that a ruined plan could be a gorgeous opportunity for connection with someone else? How could I think about my own responsiveness in a way that helps me to keep good humor and hang on for the ride, even as I get bounced around by whatever the circumstances are? And so this idea of keeping the knees flexed felt right to me. It's a visual image that feels helpful to me. So I imagine myself standing at the edge of the pool of life, ready to dive in with my knees flexed. So flexed and springy knees then become, and they mean to me, the ability to make a split-second decision on the fly. They mean that I can choose to vault, right, or flip, or soar gracefully, or streak forward with power. Flexed and springy knees allow me to determine the intensity I put into my response. Will I respond with playfulness, forceful energy, or gentle grace? Depending on the situation, any one of those might be called for. With locked knees, I can do none. So if you think about standing at the edge of the pool ready to dive in, if my knees are locked tight, I will at best take a little bitty hop forward, or if I bend at the waist, make a great big painful splash. So that's what I mean by keeping my spiritual knees flexed. Bending the knees and keeping that little bounce in my legs is a metaphor for keeping my attitude flexed, keeping my mindset receptive to new information, and being willing to flow creatively toward the next moment with that new information. The loved one at the door. Now there will be more people for breakfast. And now everyone knows what my bedhead looks like. If my knees are locked and closed, and I face a situation with rigidity, I lose my ability to be creative and responsive. So flexed spiritual knees allow me to be creatively responsive. And that might look like when my well-laid plans are canceled due to circumstances out of control, like sick kids or snow days or broken cars. Then I can decide, potentially, that this is the exact right moment to vault and have a picnic in the middle of the living room floor with orange juice and wine glasses. Or I can invite all my kids as friends over and order pizza. Or I can take the sick kid into bed with me, forget everything around me, and enjoy a rare day of snuggles and endless YouTube or movies. Playful parenting is another way to be creatively responsive. And there's a wonderful book by that title. And it was a bit of a game changer for me. And the basic idea is to engage with your kids playfully, precisely when I might otherwise respond with attempts to reprimand or control. So that's so important, right? Because the question isn't whether I play with my kids. Of course I do. Play with them all the time. The question is, can I have a playful mindset exactly when I face the situation that pushes my buttons? Keeping my knees flexed then helps me to remember to say, race you to the blue mailbox when I get, no, I don't want to go to school. Or to suggest doing homework in 10-minute spurts with alternating 5-minute racing through a homemade obstacle course in the living room. And I bet you dollars to donuts that it will be more fun, more memorable, build a better relationship, and the whole thing will take less time than squaring up for battle. So keeping my knees springy means that I can vault when I want to. Sometimes I don't want to vault. Sometimes I need to soar with grace and gentleness. Sometimes I need my springy knees to help me to have a lighter touch. Keeping my knees bent means that when the situation before me is a mess of my own making, I can try to soar gracefully into compassion or forgiveness. I can choose a lighter touch instead of slamming shamefaced into a shamefaced, painful belly flop of self-recrimination. I've done those. Those aren't fun. I can choose to soar into a moment of self-awareness by asking myself questions like these. What was I trying to accomplish? What needs was I attempting to meet with my behavior? What had I hoped would happen? Flexible knees symbolize a flexible mind, and a mind that can ask gentle questions of itself can move forward toward love and kindness. Similarly, if I'm faced with a mess of someone else's making, I can soar into empathy and understanding. Responding with creative flexibility can mean that I withhold judgment about the mess making, and instead I focus on offering compassion and figuring out new strategies to help undo the mess. Creative flexibility can also mean that I can quickly look for new possibilities, or maybe new opportunities. Locked knees and locked minds prohibit seeing an abundance of possible solutions and just keep us zeroed in on the mess or the apparent failure. So just like with other springs, the springs in our knees can provide us with a source of power. That flexibility, that bounce, when compressed and then released, allows us to have a surge of power or energy. And there are times that a powerful response is called for. Crises are like this. There are times that life brings us unforeseen circumstances that call for us to respond quickly or with force. Thankfully, I've not had too many of those instances in my life. However, I also don't expect to go my whole life and never have to face this, ever. And in a small way, if you think about driving a car, which is something we don't generally think about, we just do all the time. But it's a little like this. If you drive with a springy-kneed attitude, you might be a relaxed but definitely attentive driver. And you can imagine many road scenarios in which this kind of readiness or springiness can allow us to make super quick, decisive choices that keep us and others safe. And the flexed knees, that flexed knee mindset, allows us to draw on power when we need it. But there's another aspect of keeping flexed spiritual knees that I wanted to touch on for a second. Keeping my knees flexed, to me, also indicates a kind of openness, or at least a willingness to be open. The Course in Miracles talks about a little willingness. And I love that word little, because just a tiny bit is enough. If you just for a second, bear with me, picture a horse in your mind, and picture it facing away from you. And now think about its ears. Horses have the most marvelously expressive ears. And the horse may be facing away from you, but at least one ear will be turned backward towards you to pay just enough attention to be fully aware. That one attuned ear is like that little willingness. That one listening ear is that little tiny bit of openness to what is going on around us. And that little bit of flexibility is sufficient to open the door to all kinds of marvelous possibilities. Whether we think of that one perked ear or those bouncy, unlocked knees, they indicate a kind of readiness for whatever it is that's next. Sometimes the hiccups in life are not small. Sometimes they're big. And sometimes they're not hiccups, they're tragedies. The loss of a child, the loss of your livelihood or freedom, war and the consequences of war. Sometimes the circumstances are big enough that it's all we can do to put one foot in front of the other and stumble forward one moment at a time. Those are times to focus on the instant we're in, and only this instant. In this instant, I breathe. In this instant, I live. Nothing more. Until we're able to get our bearings. And those are not times we master on our own. We need help. But for most of us, most of the time, a vast majority of the hiccups we face in life are not existential. They're the complexities of life and relationships. They just are. Relationship conflict, that one ear, that one perked ear, that one little willingness, that little bit, that little openness is all that's required, really, to allow possibility back into our experience. And that's not to say that the willingness to be open helps make things be the way that we want them to be. That would be rigidity again. That would be like saying, if I listen, then I'll get this or that. It doesn't work that way, right? It works more like this. If I listen, perhaps I'll discover something interesting. Maybe the new information will be illuminating. If I turn my back, lock my knees, and cross my arms in defiance of whatever situation is before me, I'm not open. And any possibility of something good coming my way is drastically diminished. With my flexed knees and my perked ear, I'll be able to take the new information and consider whether to vault playfully, to soar gracefully, or to surge forward. Keeping my knees flexed is also a way for me to remember just to be willing to be open. Life. Things rarely go how I planned. Things frequently go awry, and I mess stuff up all the time. This image of me standing at the edge of the pool of life, ready to dive, and with my knees flexed, and just a little bit of a jaunty bounce in my thighs, helps me to cultivate an attitude of creative flexibility in my response to life. And it's that attitude that helps me to live more richly, more fully, and more joyfully in the middle of all the messes that I meet or make.